Hey, stop scrolling for a second, you need to hear this. A billionaire installed hidden cameras in his own mansion because something felt wrong. He didn't know what. He just knew his gut was screaming at him every time his fiancée smiled a little too perfectly. What those cameras caught wasn't betrayal in the way he expected. It was worse. And it would crack open a secret that had been buried for over 30 years. Stay with me. This gets unbelievable. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you belong to? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told. It's about wealth, family, betrayal, and a secret so painful it changed a man's entire life in one single afternoon. I promise you, by the end of this, you won't look at the people who serve you coffee, clean your home, or stand quietly in the background the same way again. Let's get into it. He built an empire from nothing, but he still couldn't trust the woman sleeping beside him. Gabriel Moretti was the kind of man magazines loved to write about. 38 years old, self-made billionaire, founder of Moretti Group, a real estate and tech empire that stretched across 4 continents. He had the corner office on the top floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a closet full of tailored suits that cost more than most people's rent. But Gabriel hadn't always lived like this. He grew up in a small, cracked-paint apartment in Ohio, raised by his grandmother after his mother disappeared when he was 3 years old. That was the story he'd been told his whole life. His mother left. She didn't want him. She chose something or someone over her own son. His grandmother never elaborated, and Gabriel learned not to ask. The wound was too old to keep poking. He grew up angry, hungry, determined. By 19, he was working 3 jobs and taking night classes. By 26, he'd built his first company. By 35, Forbes had his face on their cover with the headline, "From nothing to everything." He told himself the money would fill the hole his mother left behind. Didn't. 2 years ago, he met Vanessa Cole at a charity gala in the Hamptons. She was radiant, golden hair, a laugh that turned heads, the kind of woman who made an entire room stop breathing when she walked in wearing that yellow silk dress she loved so much. She told him she came from old money that had run dry, and that she was rebuilding her family's name through her boutique fashion consulting firm. Gabriel fell hard. Fast. Maybe too fast. Within 8 months he proposed. Vanessa said yes with tears in her eyes, and the world called them the perfect couple. Tabloids loved them. Investors loved them. Everyone loved them. Everyone except Rosa. Rosa Delgado had worked as the head housekeeper at the Moretti estate for almost 2 years. She was 54 years old, quiet, humble, always the first one awake and the last one to leave. She moved through the mansion like a shadow, present but somehow invisible to most of the people who lived there. Except to Gabriel. There was something about Rosa that Gabriel couldn't explain. Sometimes he'd catch her staring at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Not the way staff usually looked at their employer, but the way someone looks at a memory they're afraid to say out loud. Once, she'd hummed a lullaby while dusting the piano in the sitting room, and Gabriel had frozen in the doorway, his chest tightening for reasons he couldn't name. He knew that lullaby. He didn't know how. He brushed it off as coincidence. Billionaires didn't have time for feelings they couldn't quantify. But 3 weeks before the wedding, small things started disappearing. Pair of diamond cufflinks. An antique watch that had belonged to his grandfather. $5,000 in cash from his home safe. Vanessa was quick to point fingers. "It has to be one of the staff," she said one night, swirling her wine glass by the fireplace. "You can't trust people like that, Gabriel. You give them a nice house to clean and suddenly they think they deserve what's inside it." Something about the way she said it, "people like that," sat wrong in Gabriel's stomach. But he said nothing. Not yet. Instead, he made a decision that would change everything. He called his head of security the next morning and had cameras installed throughout the house. Hidden ones. In the hallways, the kitchen, the foyer, even the staff corridor. He told himself it was about the missing items. Deep down, some part of him, the part that still remembered a lullaby he shouldn't remember, knew he was really looking for something else entirely. He just didn't know what yet. What he saw 4 days later would break him completely. The footage started rolling in, and at first nothing seemed unusual at all. For 3 days, Gabriel watched hours of grainy footage during his lunch breaks, feeling foolish. Staff cleaning. Deliveries arriving. Vanessa on the phone with wedding planners, laughing about seating charts and floral arrangements. Nothing. No thief. No proof. He almost had the cameras removed on the 4th day. Then, at 11:24 a.m., his security feed lit up with motion in the main foyer. Gabriel was in his office on the top floor of Moretti Tower, 30 minutes from home, when his phone buzzed with a live alert. He clicked it open, expecting to see a delivery driver or maybe Rosa carrying laundry through the hall. Instead, he saw Vanessa. She was standing in the grand foyer beneath the chandelier, dressed in that same yellow dress she'd worn to their engagement dinner. Rosa stood a few feet away, holding a stack of folded towels, her head slightly bowed the way staff are trained to stand, respectful, unassuming. Gabriel watched Vanessa's mouth move sharply. He couldn't hear the audio yet, the system was buffering, but her body language told him everything. Her finger jabbed toward Rosa's chest. Her shoulders were tense, aggressive. Rosa took a step back, shaking her head, clearly trying to explain something. Then it happened. Vanessa's hand shot out and struck Rosa across the face. Gabriel's stomach dropped straight through the floor. He sat frozen in his leather office chair, laptop open in front of him, mug of coffee going cold beside his keyboard. His assistant knocked once, said something about a 2 o'clock meeting, and Gabriel didn't even hear her. His eyes were locked on the screen, on Rosa's hand rising slowly to touch her own cheek, on the shock and humiliation written across her face, on Vanessa standing there with her chin lifted like she'd done nothing wrong at all. He rewound the footage with shaking hands and turned the audio up. "You don't touch my things without asking, do you understand me?" Vanessa's voice crackled through the speaker, cold and sharp. "I don't care whose house this is. When I'm mistress here, the rules change. Starting now." Rosa's voice quieter, trembling. "Miss Cole, I was only moving the box because the movers needed the space for the wedding tent poles. I wasn't touching your personal." "I don't want excuses," Vanessa snapped. "I want obedience. People like you should be grateful you even get to work in a house like this. People like you." There it was again, that phrase. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He watched Rosa nod slowly, swallow her pride, and continue folding the towels as if nothing had happened, as if this was simply part of the job she needed to survive. That silence, that practiced, painful silence, told Gabriel more than the slap ever could. This wasn't the first time. He thought about calling security immediately. He thought about driving home right then and confronting Vanessa in front of the whole staff. But something held him back, a strange, aching curiosity mixed with grief he didn't understand yet. He kept watching. An hour later, alone in the laundry room, Rosa sat on an overturned bucket, pressed a cold cloth to her cheek, and quietly began to cry. Gabriel had never seen this side of her. The exhaustion beneath the composure, the years of swallowed dignity. And then, through her tears, she reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out something small. Locket. Old tarnished silver on a thin chain. She opened it and stared at the photograph inside for a long moment. The camera angle was distant, but Gabriel zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. Rosa was looking at a photograph of a little boy, maybe 3 years old. Curly dark hair. Gap-toothed smile. Gabriel's own baby photo, the one his grandmother kept framed on her nightstand until the day she died, looked exactly like that. He'd seen that photograph somewhere before. But where? What Gabriel discovered next would shatter everything he believed about his own life. Gabriel didn't go to his 2 o'clock meeting. He didn't call his assistant back. He sat in his office with the door locked, replaying the image of Rosa staring at that photograph until his eyes burned. He told himself it was a coincidence. Plenty of babies had curly dark hair. Plenty of women kept old photographs of children who weren't theirs. Nieces, nephews, grandchildren, foster kids they'd once cared for. There were 1,000 innocent explanations. But his hands were shaking as he picked up his phone and called Marcus, his head of security, a retired detective who had handled far more delicate matters than missing cufflinks. "I need everything on Rosa Delgado," Gabriel said. "Full background. Today." By 6 that evening, Marcus was standing in Gabriel's office with a manila folder that felt heavier than it should have. "Her full legal name is Rosa Maria Delgado," Marcus said, sliding the folder across the desk. 54 years old. Originally from Youngstown, Ohio. Worked as a housekeeper and part-time nurse's aide for most of her adult life. Clean record. No family listed as next of kin except... He paused. Except what? Except a son. Given up for adoption in 1988. The state closed the file. Sealed records. But there's a name attached to the original birth certificate before it was amended. Marcus hesitated again, watching Gabriel's face carefully. "Gabriel, are you sure you want me to say it?" Gabriel's throat had gone completely dry. "Say it." "The birth name listed is Gabriel Anthony Delgado. Date of birth matches yours exactly." The room went silent except for the distant hum of the city outside the window, 30 floors below. Gabriel sat there, a billionaire who owned half a dozen buildings just like this one, and felt like a 3-year-old boy again, small and confused and abandoned. "That's not possible," he whispered. But even as he said it, pieces were slamming together in his mind like a puzzle he'd spent his whole life avoiding. The lullaby Rosa hummed. The way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. The photograph in that tarnished locket. His grandmother's silence every time he asked about his mother. "Left. She didn't want you. Don't ask again." What if that wasn't the truth at all? "There's more," Marcus said gently. "I pulled the adoption records that weren't sealed, a hospital social worker's notes from 1988. According to this, your mother didn't abandon you willingly. There was a custody dispute. Your biological father's family, wealthy, well-connected, pressured her to give you up, claiming she was unfit, too poor, too young, unable to provide the life you deserved. She fought it in court for over a year. She lost. The adoption was finalized when you were 3, right around the time your grandmother, your father's mother, took custody." Gabriel's mind reeled. His grandmother wasn't his mother's mother. She was his father's mother, a father Gabriel had never even known existed, who apparently died before Gabriel turned 5, leaving no trace, no explanation, nothing but a fabricated story about a woman who disappeared. "She didn't disappear," Gabriel said slowly, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. "She was pushed out. She's been right here, in my house, cleaning my floors, for 2 years. And I never even looked at her long enough to recognize my own mother's face." He thought of every time he'd walked past Rosa without a second glance. Every meal she'd quietly prepared. Every time she'd hummed that lullaby he somehow still remembered in his bones. And then, like a knife twisting deeper, he thought of Vanessa's hand striking Rosa's cheek that morning. His fiancée had hit his own mother and had no idea. Or perhaps, he thought with a chill, Perhaps she knew exactly who Rosa was, and that was precisely why she'd wanted her gone. Gabriel needed answers. And he needed them tonight. He drove home faster than he ever had in his life, but the truth waiting for him was more complicated than he imagined. Gabriel arrived at the estate just after 8 that evening, jacket abandoned in the back seat of his car, tie loosened, hands still trembling on the steering wheel. He didn't go to Vanessa first. He went straight to the staff quarters at the back of the property, a modest 2-story building where the household employees lived during their contracted stays. He knocked on Rosa's door. When she opened it, her eyes were red and swollen, a faint bruise blooming along her cheekbone where Vanessa had struck her hours earlier. She startled at the sight of him, quickly wiping her face and straightening her posture out of habit, like an employee bracing for criticism. "Mr. Moretti, I'm sorry, is something wrong with the—" "Rosa." His voice cracked on her name. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, no matter how it sounds, no matter how impossible it seems." She went very still. "In 1988, Gabriel continued, pulling the tarnished truth from Marcus's folder out of his coat pocket, "did you give birth to a son named Gabriel Anthony Delgado?" Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Tears immediately filled her eyes, and for a long moment she couldn't speak at all. When she finally did, her voice broke apart with 30 years of grief. "How did you?" she whispered. "I never told anyone here. Couldn't. I applied for this job under a different last name because I was terrified you'd find out and think I was some kind of obsessed, delusional woman chasing after money. I just wanted to be near you, Gabriel. Just to see you. I never wanted anything from you. I swear on my life, I never wanted anything." Gabriel felt his knees weaken. "You've known this whole time. You've been in my house for 2 years, and you never said a word." "I was afraid," Rosa sobbed. "Your father's family had more money and more lawyers than I could have ever dreamed of fighting. When they took you from me, they made it very clear, legally, permanently, that if I ever tried to contact you, tried to claim any relationship, they would ruin what was left of my life. I was 20 years old, alone, terrified. I lost that fight in court and I lost you. I've spent 30 years wondering if you were happy, if you were safe, if you ever thought about me at all. How did you find me?" "I saw your face on a magazine cover 4 years ago," she said, wiping her cheeks. "From nothing to everything. I recognized my son immediately. The same eyes, the same stubborn jaw your father had. I applied for a housekeeping position here under the name Delgado, my maiden name, praying you wouldn't put it together. I told myself I'd just watch over you quietly. Make sure you had someone who cared about you in this house, even if you never knew who I really was." Gabriel sank onto the small couch in her modest room. His empire, his fortune, his entire carefully built identity suddenly feeling like paper in the wind. "The lullaby," he said quietly. "You used to sing it while you worked. I knew it. I don't know how, but I knew it. I sang it to you every night until the day they took you away," Rosa said. "I suppose some things stay with us even when our minds forget." Gabriel reached out and, for the first time in either of their lives, held his mother's hand. "I have to tell you something else," he said after a long silence, his voice hardening with a different kind of pain. "Vanessa, this morning, I saw everything on camera." Rosa's face fell. "Gabriel, please don't let this ruin your wedding. I'm not worth—" "Don't," he said firmly. "Don't ever say that again. Not about my own mother." But there was still one more secret in that house Gabriel hadn't uncovered yet, and it involved Vanessa's real reason for marrying him at all. Gabriel confronted Vanessa that same night, and what she confessed left him colder than the slap he'd witnessed on screen. Vanessa was in the master suite when Gabriel walked in, sitting at her vanity removing her earrings, humming softly to herself as if the day had been perfectly ordinary. She caught his reflection in the mirror and smiled. "You're home early. I was starting to think you'd forgotten about our dinner reservation." "Sit down, Vanessa." Something in his tone made her turn around fully, earrings still dangling from one hand. "Gabriel, what's wrong?" He set his phone on the dresser and played the footage. The slap. The words, "People like you should be grateful." He watched her face carefully as she watched herself on the screen, waiting for shame, for panic, for anything resembling remorse. Instead, Vanessa's expression hardened into something calculating. "You installed cameras in your own house," she said, standing abruptly. "That's an invasion of privacy, Gabriel, that's not the point and you know it," Gabriel snapped, his composure finally cracking. "You hit a member of my staff. You've been treating her like garbage for months, haven't you? This wasn't the first time." Vanessa's jaw tightened. For a moment, she seemed to be calculating her next move like a chess player. Then, strangely, she laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Fine. You want honesty. She's been snooping around this house for 2 years like she owns it. Always watching you. Always finding excuses to be near your office, near your car, near you. I told her to back off months ago and she never listened. Something about her never sat right with me. She's my mother, Vanessa." The silence that followed was so complete Gabriel could hear the chandelier crystals shifting slightly in the draft from the hallway. "That's not funny," Vanessa said slowly. "I'm not joking. Rosa is my biological mother. She was forced to give me up when I was 3 years old. She's been working in this house because she wanted to be close to me. Not because she wanted your money, not because she wanted mine, but because she's my mother and she spent 30 years grieving me." Vanessa's face went through several rapid transformations. Shock, calculation, and finally something that looked disturbingly like relief, as though a burden had been lifted. "Well," she said, straightening her shoulders, "that actually explains a lot. Because I have something to tell you too. And honestly, Gabriel, maybe it's better this all comes out tonight." Gabriel felt a new, colder dread settle in his chest. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa walked to her closet, pulled out a slim manila folder from beneath a stack of shoeboxes, and tossed it onto the bed between them. "6 months before we met," she said, "Marcus Whitfield, your biggest competitor in the commercial real estate division, approached me. He offered me $2 million to get close to you, marry you, and eventually gain enough access and trust to leak your company's expansion plans before your IPO. I said yes, Gabriel. I'm not proud of it, but I said yes. Rosa wasn't wrong to watch me carefully. She just didn't know the real reason why she should have." Gabriel stared at the folder, then at the woman he had planned to spend the rest of his life with, feeling something inside his chest go completely, permanently numb. The woman he was going to marry had never loved him at all. And the woman he'd walked past 1,000 times without truly seeing, his own mother, had never stopped. In the days that followed, Gabriel had to make an impossible decision, one that would define the rest of his life. The wedding, scheduled for just 17 days later, was quietly called off. Gabriel didn't make a public scandal of it, though every tabloid in the city buzzed with speculation within 48 hours. He simply issued a short statement through his publicist. "Gabriel Moretti and Vanessa Cole have mutually decided to end their engagement. We ask for privacy during this time." It wasn't mutual. It wasn't private, not really. But Gabriel had learned enough in 1 week to know that some truths didn't need to be shouted from rooftops to matter. Vanessa left the estate within 24 hours, taking her belongings and, notably, leaving behind the engagement ring on the nightstand without a word. Gabriel later learned through his legal team that her arrangement with his competitor had unraveled the moment the engagement ended. Without a marriage, without access, she was worthless to them, and they cut ties immediately. She'd gambled 2 years of her life on a payout that never fully materialized. Gabriel almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But his focus wasn't on Vanessa anymore. It was on Rosa. He moved her out of the staff quarters and into one of the guest suites in the main house. A room with tall windows overlooking the garden, a fireplace, an actual bed instead of a narrow cot. Rosa protested at first, insisting it wasn't appropriate, that she was still an employee and didn't want special treatment. "You're not my employee," Gabriel told her gently, sitting across from her at the kitchen island one evening while she tried, out of old habit, to clear his coffee cup before he'd even finished it. "You're my mother. Please, Rosa. Let me take care of you. You spent 30 years wondering if I was okay. Let me spend the rest of mine making sure you are." Rosa cried more in those first 2 weeks than she had in the previous decade combined. Not out of sadness this time, but from a grief finally being allowed to heal. She told him stories he'd never known. About his father, a wealthy young man from a powerful family who had genuinely loved her once, before his parents intervened and threatened to cut him off entirely if he didn't abandon the housekeeper's daughter, which was what they'd cruelly called Rosa, despite her working as a nurse's aide, not a housekeeper at all. His father had folded under the pressure. He died 8 years later, Rosa told him, of a heart attack, still estranged from his own family, having never once tried to find his son. "He was weak," Rosa said one evening, staring into the fireplace. "But I don't think he ever stopped regretting it." Gabriel, in turn, told her everything about his childhood, the cold, quiet apartment with his grandmother, who he now understood had likely known the entire painful truth and chosen silence out of guilt, shame, or simple stubbornness. He told her about scraping together tuition money, about the nights he went to bed hungry so he could save enough to start his first business, about every milestone he'd celebrated completely alone. "I used to think," Gabriel admitted quietly, "that being unwanted made me stronger. That's the story I told myself to survive. But I wasn't unwanted at all, was I? I was wanted more than I ever knew." Rosa reached across the space between them and took his hand, the same way she had 30 years earlier when he was small enough to be carried in her arms. "You were always wanted," she whispered. "Every single day." But their healing had only just begun, and Gabriel was about to make a decision that would ripple far beyond his own family. Word of Gabriel's story began to spread, and what he chose to do with his pain surprised everyone. News travels fast in circles like Gabriel's. Within a month, whispers about the Maid scandal had transformed, oddly, into something far more human than the tabloids usually managed. A junior reporter at a local Ohio paper, digging for background on the broken engagement, stumbled onto old adoption records and pieced together fragments of the real story. A billionaire reunited with a mother who'd been forced to give him up decades earlier. Gabriel could have shut the story down entirely. His legal team certainly urged him to. Instead, after weeks of quiet conversation with Rosa, he decided to do something unexpected. He agreed to one single honest interview, not to sensationalize what happened, but to speak directly about something he now realized mattered far more than his business empire ever had. The way society treats people who work with their hands, who serve quietly, who are too often looked past. Sitting across from a respected journalist in his penthouse living room, Rosa beside him for the first time in public as his mother rather than his housekeeper, Gabriel spoke plainly. "I built one of the largest companies in this country," he said. "I employed thousands of people. And for 2 years I walked past my own mother in my own home without truly seeing her. Not because she was invisible, but because I'd been taught, without even realizing it, that people who do certain kinds of work simply don't warrant a second look. That's on me. That's a lesson this whole country needs to sit with." The interview went viral within days. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. Ordinary people, nurses, housekeepers, delivery drivers, waitstaff, flooded social media with their own stories of feeling unseen, overworked, underappreciated, dismissed by the very people they served every day. Gabriel read every single comment he could find. He didn't just talk about change. He acted. Within 2 months, Moretti Group announced a sweeping new initiative: guaranteed livable wages, full healthcare benefits, and paid family leave for every domestic and household staff member employed across all Moretti properties, along with a scholarship fund specifically for the children of hospitality and household workers, named, quietly and without much fanfare, the Rosa Delgado Foundation. Rosa wept when he showed her the paperwork. "You didn't have to do this," she told him. "I did," Gabriel said. "Because for 30 years the world made you feel small for loving me the only way you were allowed to, from a distance, silently in the shadows. I'm done letting people like you stay in the shadows." Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa's story had taken its own dark turn. Once details of her betrayal and her attempted corporate espionage surfaced in connection with a broken engagement. Her boutique consulting firm lost nearly every client within weeks. The wealthy social circles that once celebrated her stunning presence at every gala now quietly closed their doors. She learned, painfully, the same lesson Gabriel had learned in reverse. That status built on manipulation crumbles the moment the manipulation is exposed. Gabriel felt no satisfaction in her downfall. He simply moved forward, focused entirely on the mother he'd spent 30 years without. But there was still one final piece of the story left unresolved, a piece that would bring Gabriel's entire journey full circle. Gabriel decided to do something no one, not even Rosa, saw coming. 6 months after that fateful afternoon in the foyer, Gabriel sat with Rosa in the garden behind the estate, the same garden she used to tend quietly during her breaks as staff, never once imagining she'd someday sit there simply as a mother enjoying tea with her son. "I've been thinking," Gabriel said, turning his cup slowly in his hands, "about everything we lost. 30 years, Rosa. Birthdays, holidays, every single milestone a mother is supposed to witness. My first day of school, my college graduation, the day I signed the papers for my first company. You missed all of it. Not because you didn't want to be there. Because it was stolen from you. Gabriel, please, we've talked about this. The past is. I know. But I want to give you something back. Not to replace what was taken. Nothing could ever do that. But something real." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Not a ring this time, but something far more meaningful to him. Inside was a key. "There's a house," Gabriel said, "about 10 minutes from here. Small, quiet, with a garden twice the size of this one, and a porch that faces the sunrise. I bought it last month. It's yours, Rosa. Not staff quarters. Not a guest suite in someone else's home. Your own home with your name on the deed, for the very first time in your life." Rosa's hands trembled as she opened the box, and for the first time since they'd reunited, she couldn't find words at all. She simply reached out and pulled her son into her arms, the embrace they should have shared every single day for 30 years compressed into one long, tearful moment beneath the afternoon sun. "There's more," Gabriel said, his voice thick. "I want you to walk me down the aisle someday. Not literally. I know that's usually the father's role, but when I do find someone who deserves to stand beside me, I want you there in the front row, the way you should have been at every important moment of my life. I want the world to know exactly who my mother is. Not hidden. Not a secret. Not staff. My mother." Rosa laughed through her tears. "You've given me more in 6 months than I ever dreamed of in 30 years of missing you. You gave me everything first," Gabriel said quietly. "You fought for me in a courtroom you couldn't win. You loved me from a distance for 3 decades and never once stopped. You came into my house not for money, not for status, but just to be near me. That's not nothing, Rosa. That's the realest love I've ever known." Word of the modest private house gifting ceremony eventually reached the public too, not through Gabriel's publicist this time, but through a neighbor who posted a simple, heartfelt photo online. A mother and son standing on a porch together, hands intertwined, both crying, both finally, completely home. And yet, one more visitor was about to arrive at Gabriel's door. someone from the past neither of them expected to see again. A knock at the door brought Gabriel face to face with the family that had torn his mother and him apart 30 years earlier. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening. Gabriel was at Rosa's new home, helping her hang photographs in the living room. Old pictures she'd kept hidden away for decades, finally given a place on real walls in a real home. A car pulled into the driveway, sleek and black, unfamiliar. Gabriel watched through the window as an elderly woman stepped out, leaning on a cane, moving slowly but deliberately toward the front door. Rosa's face went pale the moment she saw her through the window. "That's your father's mother," Rosa whispered. "Eleanor Whitmore. Your other grandmother." Gabriel's chest tightened. He hadn't even known this woman existed until the knock at the door, hadn't considered that his father's family, the people who had legally, financially crushed Rosa 30 years ago, might still be alive, might someday come looking for the grandson they'd erased. He opened the door himself. Eleanor Whitmore stood there, 81 years old now, her once powerful posture bent slightly with age, her eyes, Gabriel's eyes, he realized with a jolt, filled with something he hadn't expected. Not arrogance but shame. "I read about you in the papers," she said, her voice trembling. "The interview. The foundation. I recognized you the moment I saw your face. You look exactly like my son did at your age." She paused, swallowing hard. "I came to apologize. 31 years too late, but I came." Rosa appeared behind Gabriel in the doorway, her body rigid with old, protective fear. "Eleanor," she said carefully. "Rosa," the older woman said, and to everyone's shock, her eyes filled with tears. "I have spent 3 decades regretting what my husband and I did to you. We told ourselves we were protecting our son's future, protecting the family name. We were wrong. We were cruel. And we destroyed something that could have been beautiful simply because we couldn't accept that love doesn't check bank statements before it decides who's worthy." Gabriel stood frozen in the doorway, watching 31 years of buried pain hang in the air between 3 people connected by blood, betrayal, and somehow still by love. "My husband died 4 years ago," Eleanor continued. "He never forgave himself either, though he was too proud to ever say it aloud. I'm not asking for forgiveness today. I know I don't deserve it, not after everything you both lost because of decisions I made. I only wanted you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry, and that if either of you ever wanted to know more about your father, the good in him, because there was good in him, Gabriel, before fear and pressure made him weak, my door is open." Rosa's hand found Gabriel's, steady despite everything. He looked between the 2 women who had, in entirely different ways, shaped the course of his entire life, one through unwavering love, the other through devastating loss, and made a choice. "Come in," Gabriel said quietly. "Have some tea. We have 30 years to catch up on, and honestly, life's too short to keep punishing each other for the mistakes that were never really ours to fix alone." Eleanor wept openly as she stepped inside, and for the first time in 3 decades, 3 generations of a broken family sat together in the same room, not with everything healed, not with every wound erased, but with the door finally, truly open. The final chapter of Gabriel's story wasn't about revenge, or money, or even reunion. It was about something far simpler, and far more powerful. 1 year later, everything had changed, and Gabriel finally understood what truly mattered. A year after that camera first caught Vanessa's hand striking Rosa's cheek in the grand foyer of the Moretti estate, Gabriel stood in that same foyer again, but everything about it felt different now. The chandelier still sparkled overhead. The marble floors still gleamed. But the house no longer felt like a museum of wealth Gabriel rattled around in alone. It felt like a home, filled with the sound of Rosa's laughter drifting from the kitchen, the smell of the arroz con pollo she insisted on cooking herself despite Gabriel hiring a full culinary staff, And on this particular Sunday afternoon, the quiet presence of Eleanor sitting in the sitting room, teaching her great-grandson-to-be photographs how to properly hold a teacup, slowly rebuilding a relationship none of them had thought possible. Gabriel had changed too, in ways that went far beyond a broken engagement and a discovered family. He'd stepped back from the day-to-day grind of Moretti Group, hiring a capable COO to handle daily operations, and instead poured his energy into the Rosa Delgado Foundation, which had already funded educational scholarships for over 300 children of domestic and hospitality workers across the country. He personally visited hotels, estates, and corporate offices, not as a billionaire inspecting his investments, but as a man who now understood in his bones that the people who quietly keep the world running deserve to be seen, valued, and protected. He'd also quietly begun dating again. A schoolteacher named Elena he'd met at one of the foundation's scholarship ceremonies, someone entirely unimpressed by his wealth and entirely captivated by the man he'd become since the truth came out. Rosa adored her instantly. "You know," Rosa said one evening, sitting beside Gabriel on the porch of her own home, the sunset painting the sky in soft orange and pink, "if none of this had happened, if Vanessa had never hit me, if you'd never installed those cameras, I don't know if I ever would have found the courage to tell you the truth. I might have just kept quietly loving you from the shadows forever." Gabriel took her hand. "Then I suppose even the worst moments can lead somewhere good, if we're brave enough to follow them all the way through." "Is that the lesson then?" Rosa asked, smiling. "For everyone watching your story now?" Gabriel thought about it for a long moment, about his younger self, angry and hungry and convinced that success alone could fill the hole his mother's absence left behind. About every person he'd once walked past without truly seeing. About the quiet dignity of people who serve, who sacrifice, who love without expecting anything in return. "I think the lesson," he said finally, "is that the people we overlook are often the ones who love us the deepest. Status, money, appearances. None of it tells you who truly cares about you. Sometimes the person standing quietly in the background, the one everyone else looks past, is the one who's been loving you the longest, the hardest, and the most honestly. Don't wait 30 years to see them. See them today." If this story touched your heart even a little, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. If you're new here, consider subscribing because we tell stories just like this every single week, real, emotional, human stories that remind us what actually matters in life. And if you know someone who works hard quietly in the background, someone who deserves to be truly seen and appreciated, share this story with them today. You never know whose life you might touch. Thank you for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next one.